as we continue our study now and look at the second last section of our study of the book of Genesis, we look at chapters 45, 46, and the first part of 47. And we see the story about Jacob and his family going down to Egypt, and about the reconciliation of Joseph to his brothers. The tension with which we left the end of the previous chapter was a tension where Joseph had been playing his hand for a while, where he was trying to see just exactly what kind of brothers were these. And he kind of waited until finally there was an acknowledgement, at least an awareness among them, that they had indeed turned away from the righteousness that was consistent with being part of a family, and had let their hatred of their brother get the best of them, and they sold him into slavery. I would imagine that that trip back home was a very interesting trip. First of all, they were encouraged by their brother. He says, now make sure you don't go fighting with one another on the way back. And rather than thinking of this as something that is a story from way, way long ago, we can hear a large family around the dinner table with the kind of fighting and disputes that go on, or the jealousies, or whatever that takes place. And this is what happens here now. Joseph says, you're going to go on the way home, and you're going to start blaming each other for who really was at fault for what's been done. He said, that's in the past. So in essence, he encourages them to live by a word of forgiveness. A very difficult thing, of course, to do when we might believe that someone else has caused trouble for us in our life, and we believe that we have a right to point out what wrong they have done. And here Joseph tells them, please don't say anything. We're told initially that there was a great cry or howling or whatever it was, as Joseph hugs and kisses and cries on the shoulder of his brothers. And we can only assume that there would be all of the different kinds of emotions that are involved with this, from the frustration of what they had done to the joy of being able to see his family once again after being away from them for a long time. We also recognize the special love that he has for his brother Benjamin, giving him all of the money and giving him 5 festal garments. The brothers had, of course, wondered when they were at table how the giver of the feast knew exactly what order they were born in, and now they were probably putting a lot of 2 and 2s together. Joseph now reveals to the Pharaoh that his family has come, and that they are going to be invited to come back down to live in Egypt. They'll be in the land of Goshen, which is kind of up in the north and to the east of the Nile. It's part of what's the Nile Delta, where the various parts of the Nile, I believe there are 5 major fingers of the Nile that, as the water splits and goes in different directions as it goes into the Mediterranean Sea. As they are living there, they are saying that they're still sheep herders and that they have cattle, and so they ask whether they can live up in that region. It's rather interesting that there is a comment that the shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. I would imagine part of that has to do with the fact that with very limited place for grazing, they used as much of the land as they could to try to raise grain or flax or something like that. And so any animal that would sort of chew down the growth would cut into their livelihood quite extensively. And so only up in the Nile Delta, where there is enough grassland from the waters that have sort of brought their moisture all around, only there would they really have enough land to do their pasturing. And so we're instructed then about how it is that Jacob and his family come down to Egypt. Joseph is very gracious to them. He, in essence, as I've mentioned, has forgiven them for what they have done. He says, you meant to do evil things. The quote is a little different than what we'll have later, but he says, you really didn't have this in mind to do something good, but God used your wickedness to do something good, to save our whole family, and to save many, many people. And that would include, of course, the millions who are in Egypt. We might infer from this as well that there are many times when God steers people to make decisions that might not look like the wisest from a very self-centered point of view, but that God might really move the people to do in order to bring a blessing to many as well. It is typical in our world that people note all of the tragedies that take place and assign those to acts of God. And some people will simply talk about Mother Nature coming at the springtime of the year and beginning to bring the flowers out and the trees and all of the crops that will be planted to help them grow. But if we were to look at the fact of how many tragedies there are around the world each day and how many blessings where the grain continues to grow and people continue to have bodies that work, we simply get so used to what is natural or normal, we would think, of everything going well, that we forget that all of that is really by the grace of God, who need not do any of it for any of us as sinners who have been born in rebellion against him. As they go back, I guess I would have loved to have been a little mouse in the tent that day when Joseph's brothers came back and met with Jacob and told him not only that Joseph was alive, but finally had to fess up to exactly why he was still alive and why he was down in Egypt. They had sort of left their father hanging. They had simply brought the cloak back and let their father assume that his son must have died. They, of course, were involved in it by pouring blood on the cloak as well as selling their brother, which is as much of an action against one's own family member as one can think of, outside of murder itself. And now these brothers have to go back and tell their father that they have let him mourn all of these years because of their hatred of their brother. It is true around the world that hatred and self-centeredness and a desire to prove one's own right by pushing everyone else down and out of the way has caused untold misery. And it certainly ought to remind all of us to look for ways in which we can ask God to help us with those very difficult situations we have where barriers come up and where we often fight to prove our own point and try and get others out of the way. We can only ask God to keep helping all of us to work at that and to remember that there are many people who are not worshiping regularly who have had something where instead of selling their brother off, they have just stayed away. And somehow they need to be able to confess that and acknowledge it without being pushed to the wall, but to be able to, in a very quiet way, acknowledge what was going on. And very often that's all that it takes to heal the problem. Joseph will once again, of course, later be asked by his brothers after Dad dies, "Are you going to get us now?" And he says, "No, I meant it before. I said that was the end of the punishment, and that's what I meant." So the family members are coming down to Egypt. Joseph has sent a good number of wagons to bring back all of their possessions, and Pharaoh has indeed said, just leave the rest of your possessions where they are up in the land of Canaan. I will take care of you, and I will watch over you, and I'll provide you everything that you need. And it seems that at first that was indeed the case. The Pharaoh then provides for these wagons for the little children and for the animals as they're going to be brought down. And then we get a rather extensive list of the 66 family members from the land of Canaan, along with Joseph and his wife and his two sons Ephraim and Manasseh. We will notice that part of the story of Genesis says who is going to be the new head of the family. Well, the head of the family normally would have been Reuben. We've talked about the fact that he took his father's concubine. Simeon and Levi had killed all the people of Shechem. Judah had impregnated his daughter-in-law. The later sons of Leah and the sons of Zilpah and Bilhah don't come in for much note, but they were all involved in selling their brother. And so we have son number 11, remember the firstborn son of Rachel, now being the new head of the family. And we will see in the next unit, that the final unit, that the blessing on Ephraim and Manasseh is a blessing which indeed makes them 2 tribes worth. There is no tribe of Joseph later on up in the land of Israel, but there are tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh that fill really the whole central third of the country. Usually the double portion of a blessing went to the oldest son, or in this case the new designated head of the family, and that oldest son then, or designated head of the family, would receive a double portion of the blessings and be responsible to take care of his father's immediate family, usually his own mother and the other wives that might be involved there. And in this case then Ephraim and Manasseh getting 2 portions, are really playing a role in being identified as on an equal status, and that they would be the heads. And that will go on all the way to the time that they're in Egypt, and for about 200 years after they get in the land of Canaan. Particularly Ephraim is going to be a very important tribe. Remember, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Benjamin would be really the Joseph and Benjamin tribes, and the story will revolve around the Ephraim tribe with Samuel, and then around the tribe of Benjamin with Saul coming from Benjamin. But then at the time of about 1,000 years before Christ, much, much later than this, the power will swing over to the tribe of Judah, the fourth son of Leah, and David will take over at that time. So there's a little bit of, there are some hints that are going to come from that. We get a sense of the dilemma that sibling rivalry is going to cause throughout the generations. We saw that a little bit early on with the other family members of Abraham's family, that Lot's two children, Ammon and Moab, and Edom, the descendants of Esau, will all cause trouble for Israel. Abraham also has sons, descendants known as Amalek, and they will also cause trouble later on. So there are all sorts of tensions within that region at the time of the Israelites' reappearance, which will all have been hinted at already here. As they get down into the land, then they are given this special land, and they are given the pick of wherever they want to live. 5 of the brothers of the 12 go before Pharaoh, and then later we find that Jacob himself goes before Pharaoh. We have this very, very odd scene where Jacob is actually blessing the Pharaoh. Now, on Jacob's way down into Egypt, he sees God one more time. Remember, he had seen God at Bethel when he is fleeing as a young man from his brother Esau, where he sees the angels of God ascending and descending. And then he sees God once again as he wrestles with God in the material in chapter 32, where he is coming back from Uncle Laban's house and needs to find out from God, are you really going to bless me? Notice that all the way through, every one of these times, the promise is, I will be with you. That really, in many ways, is the key promise all the way through the scriptures. It's that word Emmanuel later. It is what Jesus says at the very end of the Gospel of Matthew, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. It is what Paul means when he talks about us being in Christ, in that relationship with God. And so as Jacob leaves, he's leaving a land that was promised to his grandfather forever. He's also going to be told at various times and places that the wickedness of those people hasn't been fulfilled yet, and so God will let them live there for several hundred more years before finally the descendants of Jacob and his family will go back up, and then they will be charged with ridding the land of those who will be wicked far on into the future. This is historically what's probably the Middle Bronze Age, in the 1700s and 1800s, somewhere in there, and the Late Bronze Age, when Egypt will have very strong control over the land of Canaan, will be followed by a period of weakness when they will go back. So as we move on in the story, we find Joseph and his family coming down into Egypt, and we find this blessing now that is put on the head of Ephraim and on the head of Manasseh. I might just make a couple of brief comments about this concept of blessing. It's rather strange for us to think that human beings would speak words that would actually have a force on beyond the time that they would die. And we'll look at that a little bit more in the blessing of all the descendants. But as we think about how Jacob then goes to bless Pharaoh, what he is really saying is that God's really in charge. That's what the Pharaoh who won't let the Israelites go will deny. He will not think that God is in charge, but he will think he's in charge. The pharaohs generally looked at themselves as being in charge of the entire land. There was even an opinion that when they died, they were almost godlike after they died and had special powers to rule. And so one would want to be very careful not to cross the pharaoh while he was alive, because he could maybe do some pretty bad stuff to you later. So Joseph and his family are going down into an area where people worship other gods. You notice that his 2 children, Ephraim and Manasseh, are born to him and his wife Asenath. And Asenath is the daughter of Potipharah, a different Potiphar, not the one that he served earlier, but Potipharah, the priest of On, which is the royal city where the worship would have gone on at that time. And as they go and settle down there, many of the wives of the other brothers are not counted. We're told there's 66 persons, plus some of the wives are mentioned, most of them are not. And then with Joseph and his wife and the two children, we find the full complement of 70. That's often seen as a significant number. I've never really come across a good explanation for it, but here Benjamin, who seems to be the youngest and hardly out of being a teenager, seems to have an awful lot of children already by the time that he comes down into Egypt, and I don't know really what we can make of that, other than that some parts of the story either have not been clear to us, or there were some different patterns that were going on in the marriage practices with Benjamin. His wife and the other wives are by and large not mentioned at that time. As they get down into Egypt, they are going to be settled in a region where they will be kind of a little bit far away from the other people, and so they probably will not mix as much with them and have as many troubles. This is called the period of the Hyksos, where foreigners had come in and had taken over the land, and as we've discussed before, it is in that light that it might be easier for Joseph to rise in importance, because all of the other Egyptians that were ruling at this time were also from elsewhere, and might make it possible then to understand when a new pharaoh rises who does not know Joseph, that that is the time when those native Egyptians came back. So in Egypt, this is called the Second Intermediate Period, and will be followed by the New Kingdom period. So as we draw to a close with this particular section, we see that Joseph has made peace with his brothers and has let them know that he will not be after them. Thank you once again for continuing your study, and God's continued blessings on you as you reflect not only on the sin and the wickedness of that time, but also on the mercy of God that can come through people then and now. God's continued blessings. Thank you.